Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Someone stop me if that is incorrect. Good evening. Thank you for joining us this evening for the first of 3 City Council candidate forums sponsored by Missoula Neighborhoods and the League of Women Voters of Missoula. My name is Natalia Taylor, and I am a member of the League of Women Voters of Missoula. I would like to begin this forum by reading the League of Women Voters Land Acknowledgement Statement. The League of Women Voters of Missoula acknowledges that we gather on the traditional lands of the Salish, Kootenai, Kalispel, Pondere, Blackfeet, and Shoshone tribes. The voting rights of these native peoples were not secured until the 1960s, 40 years after the 19th Amendment secured the right for some women to vote. The League is committed to protecting equal access to voting and resisting efforts to disenfranchise. I'd like to thank Kalina Pritchard and Melissa Glukert of Missoula Neighborhoods for coordinating this forum, our League of Women Voters volunteers, and MCAT for broadcasting our program. I'd like to thank all of our candidates for their willingness to serve Missoula and for participating in tonight's forum. We have a live audience tonight in the City Council chamber, and I ask the audience to please hold their applause until the end of the forum to maximize the time the candidates have to answer questions. Tonight's forum features candidates from Wards 1 and 5. Ward 1 includes the Rattlesnake and North Side of Missoula, and the candidates for a 4-year term are Eric Melson and Gwen Nicholson. Ward 5 includes 39th Street, South Hills, and Miller Creek areas, and the candidates for a 4-year term are Bob Campbell and Lynn-Wood fields. This forum follows the nonpartisan, unbiased, and impartial format established by the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan, nonprofit member organization. We never support candidates or political parties. The purpose of this forum is to give Missoula voters an opportunity to submit written questions to the candidates and hear the candidates' responses. Audience members may write a question on the card provided and we will collect them, and people also have the opportunity to submit questions to the Missoula Neighborhoods website by noon today. Candidates will be asked as many questions as time permits. There may not be enough time to ask all the questions submitted, and the questions will be screened for duplication. All candidates will answer each question, and each candidate will have the same amount of time to respond. Responses will be strictly timed to ensure fairness. The order candidates respond in will rotate, so each candidate will have an opportunity to speak first and last. Just before this evening's forum, we drew candidates' numbers from a basket to determine the speaking order, so it has been randomized, and we will start with opening statements, then go to questions, and end with closing statements. We will begin with 2-minute opening statements from our candidates, and we will begin with Ward 5, Bob Campbell.
Thank you very much. Thank you, League of Women Voters. Thank you, Missoula Neighborhoods. My name is Bob Campbell, running in Ward 5. That's a little bit about my background. I've been in Montana since 1993, and I came here as a city council land use planner, urban planning, development review, subdivision review, zoning review for Gallatin County, floodplain management. So I have a background in development review, which I think be helpful going forward. And then from there, I started a career in law enforcement. I did 27 years as a police officer in Montana. Western Montana. Started off at the top as chief of police up in Hot Springs, population 444, and then went down to Plains for a time. And after 3 years, I met my wife in Plains, and we came to Missoula, where she was from, and I've been here in Missoula since 1999. I was a police officer then, and just this past December 2022, I retired as a sergeant from the Missoula Police Department. And right now, I'm a loss prevention investigator for a private company here in Missoula. And I believe my 32 years altogether of public experience in the land use planning field, as well as law enforcement, as well as procurement of materials within the police department, which is my last gig as a projects manager, managing inventory, managing uniforms, police vehicles, and procurement of a lot of that equipment for the largest segment of the budget of the city of Missoula, which is the police department. Having that background, I think, qualifies me to perform a different type of public service, and that's why I'm running for council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Lynn-Wood Fields, your opening statement.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lynn-Wood Fields, and just because it'll come up, my first name is Lynn-Wood, and my last name is Fields. I had hippie parents. I want to thank very much the League of Women Voters for hosting us, and also the neighborhood councils. I also want to thank Bob. It's been great running with you, and it's great to be with you as well. I'm going to give just a tiny bit of background about why I'm running. The other day I was at the mayoral candidate forum, and a woman came up to me and said, "So what's your platform?" And I'm sure we've all heard that, and how do you do a 2-minute spiel about your entire thoughts in all of your heads? And then she said to me, "You've got to come up with an acronym. You've got to come up with an acronym, and you've got to tell everybody that acronym." So I came home and I told my husband, "What's my acronym? Like, why am I running?" And he said to me, "Well, let's think about it." And I threw out a few, and he said, "No, that one's not good." And then we eventually came up with BASE. So here's my platform in a 2-minute spiel. BASE, B for budgets. I am a filmmaker. I'm mostly an executive producer. I have done millions of dollars of budgets. It's my specialty, and it brings me actually great joy doing budgets. So, and then A, accountability. One thing I've noticed as I've been knocking doors is a real lack of people being able to feel like they can reach their city council. So I will be hosting a Zoom meeting every Tuesday, once a month, so that my constituents can talk to me and give me feedback, and vice versa. S, service. I grew up in Montana in the Flathead Valley. I have 2 children, and my father, who was also on city council when I was young, used to say, if you live in Montana, you're obligated to be of service to Montana. So I feel like this is one way I can be of service. And then the last one is E, and I'm combining that with environmental and economics. I believe strongly in the environment, and I think that Missoula is really in the forefront of being able to use environmental climate change money to lead jobs and workforce development in the state and actually nationally. So thank you, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. Gwen Nicholson, your opening statement.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Gwen Nicholson. I'm a lifelong Missoulian. I was born and raised here. I'm also indigenous to here. I'm Salish, Kootenai, and Shitsamish, so I'm kind of fond of saying that I'm a 5,000th generation Montanan. And growing up in the city, you know, my father was a firefighter. He was assistant city chief of the Missoula Fire Department for a long time. So I kind of grew up loving not only just the city, but also the public service aspect of how all that works. I'm a graduate of the University of Montana School of Journalism. I graduated in 2021, and since then I've worked as a journalist, I've worked as an activist, and I've worked as a policy worker for the Montana Budget and Policy Center. And in that time, I think I've become aware of a lot of the issues that we face as Missoulians. You know, I think we're going through a lot of change and growth. The Missoula of today is not the Missoula that I recognized when I was a child. Things have really changed, and I think we need some new voices in order to kind of recognize what parts of Missoula we're able to preserve, what parts of Missoula need to change in order to meet the needs of tomorrow and to grow and support a new community that we want to see be more equitable, be more inclusive, and be more supportive, especially towards working class families, new families putting down roots here in Montana. I think, you know, we can do that. It's just going to require a lot of coalition building. It's going to require a lot of reaching out and making new connections and listening to marginalized voices. And I hope that as somebody who is a renter, as somebody who is indigenous, as somebody who is from an LGBTQI community, I can bring that kind of new, fresh voice to City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nicholson. And our second candidate from Ward 1, Eric Melson.
Thank you so much. Hey, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to the League of Women Voters and to the Neighborhood Council for co-hosting this. My name is Eric Melson. I'm running for my first term as a Ward 1 City Council member. I live in the Lower Rattlesnake neighborhood. I've been a resident of Missoula for 15 years. I moved here after I graduated with a degree in natural resource management to come and be a wilderness ranger in the Selway Bitterroot right over here. I spent about 7 seasons working in the backcountry as a wilderness ranger. That led to a job with a nonprofit and I've spent about the last 15 years working in nonprofit management, outdoor recreation policy, and in outdoor conservation. Worked in Washington, D.C. for a national organization mobilizing and activating outdoor recreation users to push back against rollbacks to the national monuments and to protect and fund our land management agencies. That led me to working with Governor Steve Bullock on a year-long private-public partnership called the Parks and Focus Commission, where we studied Montana state park systems, learned that they were chronically underfunded, and that led me to working on the statewide ballot initiatives to legalize, regulate, and tax cannabis, with proceeds going to support outdoor recreation and conservation programs in the state of Montana. I spent an entire legislative session in Helena learning about policies and working for various clients, and I've worked on a couple of bond and crisis service levies here in Missoula. I think for me, service is at the core. I've taken a lot from this community, and I just really want to give back to the place that's given me so much. So thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Melson. We're going to now move on to questions submitted by the public. And for those of you who are here in the audience, you can continue to submit those questions. The questions will fall into several broad categories, and I will do my best to divide up the time so that we get to some questions in each category. If you'd like me to repeat a question before your turn, just let me know. And a reminder, we'll rotate the way I tried to explain earlier. So first and biggest, I think, on many Missoulians' minds, is housing. I'm going to begin with this question submitted by a member of the audience. What are your goals or specific techniques you would like to use to help Missoula's affordable housing shortage? And we'll begin with candidate from Ward 1, Mr. Melson.
Yeah, I think affordable housing is a critical issue for us here in Missoula. There's people getting pushed out, and the city can create and incentivize a private market that will create more affordable housing. I think we have three real components to that. The first one is we need to revise our land use code. We have to come up with a vision for what our community wants to look like in the future. What are the attributes that we want to have? How is that compatible with the regulatory framework? How do the changes in our code impact our sewer districts, for example? We need to invest in the housing market. I think one thing that's really creative that we're doing is land banking. Places like the Sleepy Inn we can redevelop, and part of that sale goes to support the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The last one is we need to incentivize local developers to use the tools that are at their disposal to create more units. We have a massive shortage in units.
Thank you, Mr. Melson. Ms. Nicholson.
A surprising amount of tools on the table to help us deal with this housing crisis. First and foremost, making sure that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is well funded and that it's being put to good use. I think we need to be setting the minimum contribution to the trust fund to at least $500,000, which we can use for things like a universal rental application, a universal right to counsel, converting rentals to co-ops, which we've seen a lot of success with in Ward 1 on the north side, in places like Wolf Avenue. Preserving and rehabilitating currently affordable units, making sure that we're reinvesting money into maintaining the amount of housing that we have. I also think that when we're appointing candidates to the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, we need to be supporting people who support affordability requirements. We'll strengthen relocation policies to apply to tenants displaced in the year prior to the MRA request, and refunding security deposits. So I think we have a lot of avenues in which we can attack the crisis.
Thank you, Ms. Nicholson. And moving to Ward 5, Ms. Fields.
Well, in addition to what we've already heard, that was the very first meeting I ever had was with the people who've been doing the affordable housing around the state, and also that was given by the governor. Good news that we never talk about is that Missoula is actually doing the most of any city in the whole state of Montana. In the next 5 years, we're going to see a massive amount of change in this. We have a lot of programs. One of the things I'm really seeing is a lack of being able to tell the community what actually exists already. We have been building like crazy, and there's more to be done, and the zone reform is a big part of that, but making sure the community knows which places are already built too. Some other things that I've noticed that we could be doing better promotion on is multi-use. I heard co-ops. That is incredibly important. Not everybody needs to own a house, but they do need to have safety in where they're living, and that structure is just getting built out. And again, we are leading that in Missoula for the nation. These co-ops are revolutionary for how they work. The other thing I'd like to see is more promotion of ADUs. Oh my God, it goes fast. ADUs for people to do different housing. And the last one is a database of potentially some of these fixed income who could have other people move in.
Thank you, Ms. Fields.
I know, that's fast.
And Mr. Campbell.
Thank you. So first and foremost, what I'm hearing from the development community is they need predictability in the process. And right now, there is none. That's why we're updating the growth policy, updating the zoning regulations for the city. I've had experience in Gallatin County with that, and I would hope to bring some of that experience forward. So that needs to be revamped. Holding costs are killing developers right now with interest rates. So really important to get that development policy and that growth policy straightened out. I do agree on renter occupancy housing. These limited equity co-ops that are going in are very helpful. Wolf Street's a great example of something that works. I'd like to see more of that. I think we could use Affordable Housing Task Force dollars to enhance that. You know, there's going to be $5 million coming to trust fund this year from sale of Sleepy Inn and from West Broadway properties. And I think it's going to be a great start going forward for affordable housing projects, but we need to invest some of that money so it lasts the long term, so we can keep having 300,000, 300,000, 300,000 for many more years to come from that initial $5 million investment.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Next question, also on housing. Suppose the city council faced a development proposal that meets all the regulations, yet a large number of citizens appeared before city council to stop it. How would you decide how to vote? And we will begin with Ward 5 with Lynn-Wood Fields.
Okay. I think it really just comes down to why we have public comment. We need to hear from everybody, including our constituents, about why this is happening. I'm also one of those people that really believes in research before I make ideas and decisions on voting. So I would take into account all the public comment from the citizens and then also look at what the developer is proposing. I do have to say that seems to be one of the hardest things about city council is you're going to make choices that doesn't make everybody happy. I think you have to look at the long term of what's going to benefit the community and what our goal is. And at that point, we'll probably have a little bit of a sense of zone reform too. And does that fit the vision of the community plan? If it does, and it benefits, then that's how I would make my vote.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. Mr. Campbell?
Thank you. So I think, yeah, again, with our growth policy, it needs to be responsive to the needs of people in the community in the ward that we live in. The needs of Ward 2 are going to be different from needs of Ward 1 or Ward 6. So we need to be responsive and have community engagement for the growth policy update in the zoning ordinance, which enforces the growth policy update. I would say, too, I think part of the symptom here is lack of transparency in the process. I talked to folks and knocked doors on Lower Miller Creek and got that Riverside subdivision going in down there. And to me, I'm hearing time and time again that, you know, they were blindsided somewhere along the process. There's not enough explanation in front, not enough leeway to the people who live in that area there to say, hey, this is what's coming in. Even before that property was annexed, which they had to do an annexation, no one is aware. So I think we need better upfront transparency. Engagement is great, but we need to do old school, you know, postcards, send it out. To me, there's an equity issue there. Older folks, not internet savvy, get word out so we could have better engagement at the forefront of development process.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. On to Ward 1, Mr. Melson. Just quick refresher. Let's say that City Council faced a development proposal that met regulations, yet a bunch of citizens appeared before City Council to stop it. How do you decide how to vote?
Yeah, we've seen this happen time and time again as we're looking down the barrel of significant growth in our community. I think when I first moved here in 2008, There were for sale signs on almost all the buildings downtown. It was a much sleepier place, and now we're approving on average 600 to 700 units a year. Most of that development is happening in urban renewal areas and to the west of us, with the county just announcing a new TED development project that will have 2,000 units being installed in the next couple of years. So these are difficult conversations to have with our constituents, and transparency is critical. Being able to understand these projects inside out, upside and down, and be able to explain them with compassion, be able to communicate that effectively to constituents and explain the reasoning and the rationale is exactly what I plan to do. We are going to be building a lot of units in the next couple of years, and I think people are going to have issue with that. But again, this is for the greatest good, and we need to be doing this with intent, and we need to be developing the community that we want into the future.
Thank you, Mr. Melson. Ms. Nicholson?
So I agree with what's been said about outreach and transparency. I think neighborhoods need to be involved in development at every stage of development, and we need to be constantly seeking input from neighborhoods. As somebody who's been on the other side of that, who has been before city council arguing against certain developments that have gone in place and displaced friends of mine, I think the thing that I hear the most is concerns about development that drives gentrification forward. You know, I think we see a lot of times development that's not suited to a neighborhood going up and leads to people, working class people, being priced out of neighborhoods, pushed out of neighborhoods. I'm not in favor of replacing affordable housing with luxury housing, you know, which I think is sometimes the case that we see. Sometimes it's not the case. Sometimes concerns are about whether or not the infrastructure of an area can support that level of development, which, you know, I think we need to be making those concerns too and including those considerations into every step of the process. But outreach and transparency are critical at every stage.
Thank you, Ms. Nicholson. Another one about housing. So this constituent gave some examples of, says they're supportive of growth, but examples of kind of every now and then he observes that ordinances are not being forced on contractors and that sort of thing. So if we're going to grow, we have to do it within the confines of what's allowed by regulations. So my question really is the city prepared for this growth? Do we have enough site inspectors on staff at the city to enforce existing ordinances and policies? And we'll begin with Ward 1, Gwen Nicholson.
You know, I think the level of growth that we're seeing in Missoula is explosive. I don't think it is something that we're fully equipped to deal with. I think it is going to require some key investments in certain areas, like hiring on new staff. I also think it's going to take kind of a look at what is working as far as regulation goes around development and what isn't working. I know some people have taken a look at things like parking requirements and things like that might not necessarily be working to sustain the amount of growth that we want to see and to sustain the kind of development that we want to see at that scale. So I think it's a question of making sure that we're making the right investments as we go, and then also making sure that regulation is serving the interests of developing affordable housing and building a sustainable future for Missoula neighborhoods and not impeding that process.
Thank you. Mr. Melson.
Yeah, I can't speak accurately to the number of staff that we have right now and how to scale that to the appropriate growth levels, but what I can say is that we are undergoing a generational review of our zoning and our code, and that hopefully will align with the growth policy that we have. So our growth policy, unfortunately, was drafted and accepted before we went through zoning, and because of that, there are areas where if there is a good location to build high-density affordable housing, for example, but it doesn't meet the zoning, that developer has to go through a zoning review, and that can cost a ton of time and money. So realigning zoning and code reform with our current growth plan, I think, is critical. That is underway right now. We're about a year into that process. I think we're going to gain a lot of efficiencies from that, and I think we're going to ultimately end up with a really solid plan for how to address some of these growth issues that we're talking about.
Thank you. On to Ward 5, Bob Campbell.
Great, and I would agree with Mr. Melson. I mean, we need continuity in the growth ordinance or the growth policy with the zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance is what enforces the growth policy. Though those two aren't in harmony, this is where you start getting to those efficiency issues that you talk about. I would say insofar as staff and ability of staff to be able to handle any influx of new development that comes in or comes into the future. I mean, this is where application fees from developers have to be commensurate with the staff needed on hand to be able to provide the level of service that's required. And I think developers would be more amenable to increase application fees if in turn they're given a situation where there is a streamlined process available, that they have predictability in the process, that they could pencil out what their holding fees are going to be, especially with interest rates being as high as they are. I think if we have that streamlined process, they would be more amenable to a fee that's needed in order for CDPI to have the staff needed to do their job. Also, that's it.
Thank you. And Lynn-Wood Fields.
I also can't speak about the staff. I would say I'm concerned about that, especially as we look at the inability to budget right now and that we're probably going to have to put a pause on a lot of programs. The other thing I do have to say is I do have concerns sometimes about the fast-paced growth we have in Missoula. Sometimes I wish that we would slow down a little bit on the amount of stuff that we're building that's new and take a little bit of breath. I know that there is a need around housing, but sometimes I'm wondering if we could be more creative in our solutions like the co-op and just slow down and see what we do have sometimes and think things more green and environmental. And instead of such a fast-paced kind of manic feeling that I feel in Missoula sometimes. And I love the idea around the zone reform. Can we think about like bike paths? Can we think about things that isn't just traffic and just constant build and kind of a intense energy that we have, because potentially we may not need to have more staff. We may need to pause and see what we can do internally and also take care of the people who are on wait list right now.
Thank you. And one more question here on housing specifically. I see lots of vacant, often dilapidated homes in my neighborhood. Can anything be done to make these homes habitable and make more housing available to all? We'll begin with Ward 5, Bob Campbell.
Thank you. So part of that is function of owner responsibility. As a police officer, I know from time to time, we dealt with condemnation of property, gang in there. Owners not taking responsibility for cleanup of their property, again, the health department involved, getting other agencies involved with, basically a public nuisance situation that has to be abated. Those are done on a case-by-case basis. Time consuming. Usually there's a process that has to take place. Sometimes it has to go through the courts as well to make that happen. So there is that part of it. But the other part of it too is, just urban renewal. We have several urban renewal districts in the city here that, we could apply TIF funds for. I'm not anti-TIF, but I think we can make better use of TIF than we have in the past. That's tax increment financing. I think, we could use it appropriately. We could revamp some of these neighborhoods, get the occupants out of there, compensate them. Certainly they don't need to be paying fees for, their deposits and handle the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Lynn-Wood Fields?
Yeah, I think that gets to expand on what I was just talking about. I feel like Missoula's moving so fast on new build that we sometimes pause or don't pause and look at the houses that are here already. And I will say, if they are owned by landlords, the amount of equity that many of us have in our houses right now should be used for positive stuff in Missoula, especially when it comes to other renters. And I think some of these homes, as long as we're looking at not a safety issue around asbestos and all that, we need to look at some of these properties and reuse them. I have done a ton of work in Butte. That is a big agenda that they do. They have a historical element to it, and so they have these amazing historical homes that are getting reused. I guess I'm just having a little bit, I do believe in growth and I do believe in new growth, but I think that we don't do enough, especially on city council and as a community, to say, what do we have around here that we could reuse, resource, and buy into the equity to help people and potentially use those for good rental properties or startup homes.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. On to Ward 1, Gwen Nicholson.
Well, I definitely want to echo some of those sentiments around focusing more on renewal as opposed to out-and-out growth, and also about building equity. I think, that's something that we could possibly even use Affordable Housing Trust Fund dollars for, that kind of preservation and revitalization of existing affordable properties. I also want to say, like, I think we could be using those TIF dollars for that kind of renewal in a much more intelligent way. I also think, part of it is that these are issues that are kind of coming to us from the state and the nation. I think part of it is, wages aren't commensurate to a lot of people being able to buy these properties or rent these properties and start up things like small businesses. So finding ways to kind of encourage ways to raise local wages, I think would help with that kind of urban renewal. Also, like, well, I have 10 seconds. I think we should be focusing on renewal.
Thank you, Ms. Nicholson. And Eric Melson?
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier, but I think that the city's role in what the question is alluding to about how can we preserve the character of some of these neighborhoods and keep these historic homes and restore these homes so that they can preserve the character of the neighborhoods. I think that the city has a role in creating the foundation for the private market and incentivizing the private market to use its tools to the best of its ability to make sure that the character of these neighborhoods stays how it is. And the city can incentivize that by offering and creating the conditions to stabilize restoration projects like that. We do live in Montana, which is a very strong private property state. So the city can't impose rules, but it can create the conditions favorable for private market to invest in restoring some of these historic properties. And we've seen some of that happen downtown recently, actually.
Thank you, Mr. Melson. I'm going to move to a related topic, which is homelessness. And question here, do you have any plans for the homeless in Missoula? And we'll begin with Ward 1, Eric Melson.
Yeah, I think homelessness is a really tragic and sad problem that we are all facing as a country. This is not an endemic issue just affecting Missoula. Other cities around this state are dealing with this problem. I think it's a systemic failure of our society, to be honest. I think that local government has become the backstop to deal with this problem, and the state and the federal government need to assist with resources. The city can't handle this alone, and we're not going to solve homelessness. We haven't solved homicide. We can do our best to mitigate this, and I think we can do that with compassion. And I think that we are starting to look at other cities like Bozeman, who is considering a new ordinance about how to limit and confine some of this activity. And I think that we're going to introduce an ordinance coming up soon that will mirror what Bozeman is looking at. But we have to provide dignity and compassion to these folks.
Thank you, Mr. Melson. Gwen Nicholson.
Well, I want to say that this is an issue that's really close to my heart because I work a lot with unhoused populations, and I'm in direct communication with a lot of unhoused communities on a weekly basis. And the main thing that I hear is that we cannot keep pursuing the current model of criminalization and marginalization. It's ineffective, it's costly, it's morally dubious. It brings us into conflict with the 9th District Court ruling, Martin v. Boise. And I don't see a lot of leadership on City Council that's going to address that. I do see some from people like Kristen Jordan who are looking at finding ways in which we can get people services, vital services, things like garbage disposal, needle disposal, public bathrooms, things like that, that'll help build some stability. But I also see a lot of things coming down the pike that I think are going to be disastrous for unhoused communities in Missoula, that are going to further that kind of stigma, marginalization, and that, quite honestly, will result in further human misery. So I think we need to be looking at backing away from criminalization and marginalization.
Thank you, Ms. Nicholson. For Ward 5, Lynn-Wood Fields.
I think this is one of the most important questions we're dealing with. I think we do a little bit of othering here. I think anybody who lives in Missoula, whether you're on the street, is part of Missoula. And I think sometimes we talk about them instead of bringing them to the table. So I would very much like to have somebody from the community also coming and talking to us about what we should be doing. The other thing that is a lot of research, Finland has a 0 homeless population because what they did is they made sure that everybody had a safe place to put their head. Within 3 months, you can receive services if you are able to deal with your trauma. I think we have to look at that. And the last thing is that I ran basically because of this issue, because I sent City Council an idea that I read where you can get a nonprofit and a nonprofit debit card, and for every transaction, you get a penny, you put it to that nonprofit, and that would fund this. And so I am running a big time on that because I think we could actually fund this issue outside of our city budget, and actually all we need is funds because in my opinion a lot of Missoulians want to support this. Lastly, this is a state issue where we're not dealing with addiction and mental illness, which is a big part of this too.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. And Bob Campbell.
So I think we need to look to the programs that work, that we had success with. I look to the temporary safe outdoor shelter that's next to the jail out there, and great program, very intensive 24/7 supervision. And it is a little spendy, but I think the outcomes are pretty good there. Last I heard, there's anywhere between 40 and 45% success rate getting them into permanent stabilized housing from that program. I think that's a sustain. I think look at Villaggio and Trinity, and the services are going to be offered there vis-a-vis in shelter care, and with the hot team, I think those are things we need to sustain. So we need to look at what works and sustain those and expand on that, and that's where you need to put our finances behind and those sorts of programs. I'm not for a recently suggested idea of rotating camps around town, especially if they're unpoliced. I've seen what happened under the Reserve Street Bridge on a daily basis, and it wasn't good. So go with what works and, yeah, go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. And one more question here. How should our community address people with active addictions to drugs and alcohol who lack housing? And we'll begin with Ward 5, Lynn-Wood Fields.
Well, I think if you live in Montana, you grow up in Montana, you have addiction around you. And I have had that personally in my own life. I feel very grateful that I have had a lot of recovery around that. So the way that I believe you handle that is twofold. Learn that it's a disease. That would be probably a very important thing. Have some compassion. The second thing is there's two things. Addiction can be enabled or it can be compassionately dealt with. If people don't want help, we may not see that. And so I have a little bit of mix that sometimes somebody being in jail is the safest place for them. But people that do want to deal with their addiction, we need to be able to, as a community, find ways to get them there. We do not have a rehab facility in Missoula. To me, that is a fault of ours to deal with the people that this is a giant epidemic that is happening statewide, and it's definitely in Missoula. So I would really like to promote seeing ways that we could get people who do want help, and people that don't, we're going to have to look at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. Bob Campbell?
Thank you. So, to build on the success of a temporary safe outdoor shelter, part of that is being part of drug and alcohol addiction treatment. And I think going back to the systemic issue nationally, look at the drug crisis that we have here in the country and alcohol addiction, it's a driver of getting to that houseless situation in the first place. So we have to get on the forefront where it's more readily addressed. I think once you get into a houseless situation, it becomes tougher, and it's a tougher sell, and it's more local investment that has to be taken to get those folks the treatment they need. I look to the Healing and Ending Addiction Through Recovery and Treatment Program from the state as a way to get state tax dollars here locally to enhance alcohol and drug addiction treatment. And there needs to be accountability to the folks that are in treatment, make sure they follow through and take advantage of the programs that are available to them. And yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. On to Ward 1, Eric Melson.
Yeah, I think drug and addiction is, it's really sad. And I think that the city does have a role to play. I think that we support crisis services through our fire department, through our police department, and with our partners at the county. The county is about to open a new crisis receiving center that was funded through Medicaid. So we will actually have an addiction center that will be opening in the next year. But we need to scale these programs. The amount of folks that are suffering from addiction and that are suffering from mental problems, we need to provide the services to get these people back on track and back into society. I think housing first is a way to do that. If you get people housing, they can stabilize their lives. And so I think if we can focus on increasing the units available and getting these people stable in housing, then we can provide that backup service for them.
Thank you, Mr. Melson. And Gwen Nicholson.
So addiction is a public health issue and it's an economic issue. So we need to kind of be taking an approach that centers those first and foremost. That means reaching out to local nonprofits and leaders within the community to do outreach to these communities that are affected by addiction and extending services, especially at the point of like crisis services. It means continuing to fund things like the mental health outreach team and the HOT team, and finding permanent sources of funding for those since ARPA money is running out for those things. It means getting creative about the sources of funding that we use, like for instance, Medicaid funding for things like crisis centers. It also means, I think, taking a more empathetic approach to these things. I think a lot of times the model that has been used by city officials and by officials at every level of government has been one of treating addiction like a criminal issue. And I think we need to be treating it like a human issue.
Thank you, Ms. Nicholson. I'm going to move on to questions around governing. First, do you feel like Missoula should reform its use of tax increment financing? We'll begin with Ward 1 with Gwen Nicholson.
So with tax increment financing, it's kind of a hot button issue, but I think that there's positive aspects to it. I think it can be used in an effective way. I think the ways in which it does need to be used need to be reformed, and the approach that the city needs to take to it needs some looking at, because for one, I think there's been a certain lack of transparency. I think there hasn't been great communication on what exactly TIF is, what exactly the funding goes to, and kind of how it functions from top to bottom. So I think making sure that people are aware of how these things are working and where the money is going to be a big issue. I think making sure that TIF projects aren't contributing to the issues that we face in terms of exacerbating the housing crisis, I think will be a big issue. I'd really like to see some comprehensive transparency brought to the entire process, and if we're going to keep it around, it's going to serve the community in the way it's intended.
Thank you, Ms. Nicholson. Eric Melson.
Yeah, so TIF is a state statute, and it is also to be used within urban renewal districts, which is also a state statute. These are some of the biggest tools that we have at our disposal to combat blight. First and foremost, downtown was the first urban renewal district in Missoula, and TIF money was used to revitalize downtown, and I think the results speak for themselves. One thing that's exciting about this state statute is that the legislature did broaden the statute this year to allow for TIF money to be used for workforce housing. So this has now become one of the biggest tools we have to develop affordable housing. And we need to be doing that. This is, again, one of the largest tools that we have to develop affordable housing. And I think that we need to take advantage of that. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Melson. For Ward 5, we'll begin with Bob Campbell.
Thank you. So as I already said, I'm not anti-TIF, but I think we need to be more careful how we use tax increment financing. I mean, the one thing to keep in mind with TIF is, that increment of tax that's being generated goes back to redevelopment agency. It's siphoned away from parks, siphoned away from, schools, from police, fire, and those basic services that otherwise go through to the general fund. So we need to be mindful of that, but I think there is a role for TIF. I think, for affordable housing projects, getting horizontal infrastructure in place to help developers out in that regard. I'm talking sidewalks, streets, underground utilities, sewer, what have you, and incentivize the ability to, pencil out an affordable housing project is a good use of TIF. I also think, TIF in terms of any particular blighted property that we would redevelop. I mean, we could certainly use TIF in regard to people that we would displace with properties being redeveloped, give them means to compensate them for a time and that they're not being held to task on their deposit fees. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. And Lynn-Wood Fields.
Yeah, my understanding of TIF, and I've been doing a lot of research in the last year, is that it does have a lot of great purposes. I think the controversy comes when TIF is used and then a project sells and makes a big profit in a short term. And I think that's not a thing that we couldn't change pretty easily. What that looks like, in my opinion, is if a project, let's say a mall per se, like sells within a quick amount and makes a big profit, potentially that TIF money is redistributed back into it. I think that was people's main problems is they're using tax money, they're making profits, and it's not necessarily going back into the community. I think that's a pretty easy solution for us to find TIF less controversial and more beneficial to the community, is just putting a limit on how quickly that property can be turned around and sold. And if it is, you just put a year limit on that and then it goes back in. That's my thought on TIF. But I love using it for things like affordable housing.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. Next up. Next year, voters will decide if they want to conduct a local government review or study of Missoula's city government. What are the benefits, if any, in your opinion, in conducting a local government review? And we will begin with Ward 5 with Lynn-Wood Fields.
Yeah, I think the biggest benefit of this, and I was at City Club the other day, is I think it's really time for Missoula to look at getting a city project manager. I think that our growth has happened so much. It's crazy to me that we may not have somebody who their entire job is to know how to tell the city council how to budget, who knows how to do outgrowth of a city. We've grown a lot from a little community to a big one, and we may need somebody who specializes in this. I come from a background of a lot of different things city council does, and I think it's really important that we're of service, but somebody who specializes in city growth and can tell the community and city council and give us numbers, I think is very overdue. And so I am in support of that and probably looking at supporting if we got a project manager as a job.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. Bob Campbell.
Thank you. So my understanding of these government review commissions is that there's something in state statute that requires it every 10 years, I believe. But I think going forward with that review coming up here in not too distant future, we need to look at, I think, like a city manager form of government, given our growth, given the size of the city at this point. And we are, a lot of people like to believe, we're still a small town, but fact matter is, the growth that we're seeing, growth going forward, we're a city and we need to have a manager type in place that could kind of coordinate with department heads, with planning, with community development, with police, fire, and all above, and kind of do the day-to-day management of that, that we don't quite have now, the same way that other communities our size have. In the local government commission, presumably a board would be formed of citizens that would advise back to city council on ideas for reforming our local government and our city charter. I, for one, would like to see our city charter amended to limiting members of city council and mayor to no more than 2 4-year terms. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. On to Ward 1, Eric Melson.
This is an area I'd like to learn more about, honestly. I do know that this is a process that's state statute mandatory that allows local governments to review their structure every 10 years and make necessary changes. We have a strong mayor and council government here in Missoula, as opposed to some other cities that don't have a mayor, they have a manager. I'd be interested in learning what the advantages are of both of those systems and how we can learn from cities like Bozeman that have a city manager and not a strong mayor. But this is a growth area for me, something that I look forward to learning about more. I'll just end it there.
Thank you, Mr. Melson. And Gwen Nicholson.
This is also a growth area for me. I'm in favor of anything that brings more input into the process of city government that increases the amount of local representation, and that increases the amount of agency that neighborhoods have in local governance. I remain kind of uncertain as to whether or not a city manager would provide for that kind of input. I think it's something that I'd like to hear from the community directly about, and to kind of treat as an overall referendum on the structure of city government and how we can tailor these kinds of institutions to better work for the people and to be more democratic in form and function.
Thank you, Ms. Nicholson. Moving on, last question, same category. How can the city of Missoula provide assistance to working parents who either lack access to or face financial challenges with childcare services? And we will begin with Ward 1 with Gwen Nicholson.
So this is something I think about in terms of my day job, in terms of how we can demand more from statewide policy to support working class mothers. I think there are options that we have at the citywide level in terms of making care more affordable and accessible. I think kind of where it starts is with things like easing burdens in other places. I think if we can make rent more affordable, if we can provide more protections for renters and tenants, we can take some of the pressures off of working class families and free up more in their budget for things like childcare. I think providing incentives for creating more opportunities for childcare within the city limits, I think would be beneficial to everybody. But I also think it's going to take, lobbying at the state level. I think it's going to require kind of banding together with other municipalities and demanding more get invested into expanding that network of childcare.
Thank you, Ms. Nicholson. Eric Melson?
Yeah, this is something I think the city actually does well, and we can improve on by removing some barriers. So the city does leverage a lot of partners, United Way, the YMCA, and also the Parks and Recreation Program, which I will say is the second largest childcare provider in the city based on its after-school programs. I think that we can remove barriers to create more facilities, but the city is not going to be a child care provider, so we need to depend on the child care providers and the partners that we have, and again, create the conditions to incentivize their success. One thing that's really great is the wraparound services that Lowell School is employing. I'd love to see those services expanded. I know that Franklin School is up next, but these are services that allow parents to drop their kid off earlier and basically allow childcare and food services on both sides of the school day. And we'd love to see more of those services expanded to more schools across the city.
Thank you, Mr. Melson. For Ward 5, Bob Campbell.
Yes, I was going to mention, you stole my thunder a little bit. Lowell School, I think it's a great program they have out there, and certainly it's something we could sustain, I think expand upon. I also like to see incentivization for workforce child care or child care in the workplace as is appropriate. Not all workplaces are the same, but if you're talking like an office environment or a commercial type environment, larger corporations that come into town, I think to have incentivized being able to, have your child in a work or child care facility in a workplace is ideal. I know it's kind of a tough situation when you want to work, but you pencil out the dollars it takes to pay for child care and, well, does it pay for me to go to work or am I better off staying home? Those are really tough decisions, and be able to get more child care, in that regard, in the workplace right there where, they could have it full time would be awesome. I also agree more dollars from the state and the feds have to get on board with really tackling what is a crisis in childcare in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. And Lynn-Wood Fields.
Yeah, as a mom of 2 young kids, this is criminal, in my opinion. I think that they should straight up just pay parents to take care of their own children. If that's a federal thing that I should think happens, but that is not the reality we live in. And I want to say in my own ward, there's an amazing program happening at Cold Springs, the old Cold Springs building. They have actually co-opted childcare, and I think we can do this quite a bit. So a bunch of childcare facilities are working together, and the MCS, the school system there, gave them the building, and they're going to make sure that they're paying the childcare workers $20 or more. So that's a big part of childcare, is making sure that the people who are taking care of your kids are well paid and respected, because they're with your kids a lot. So this model is existing in Missoula right now. We can replicate this model, and they're going to share services like food services. They're going to share services like their bookkeeping, and so they're going to be able to keep their costs down, provide higher wages, and they're going to serve over 100 kids, I think is the goal. I want to say United Way was leading that, and so that's an exciting model that I think we could replicate.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. We are going to move on to some infrastructure. First question. Given that extreme heat and fire seasons will only get worse and water scarcer, do you support or oppose plans to breach the Rattlesnake Lake dams, emptying reservoirs likely to be needed for fire suppression and drinking water? And we will begin with Ward 5 with Bob Campbell.
Well, that's a tough one. To me, that would be, critical that we get community engagement and something like that, particularly the folks that live up in the Rattlesnake. See, what their needs and desires are for, a project like that would affect, that neighborhood up there. And I think too, we talk about fire suppression, I would look to, what we would hear from our firefighting, professionals, Gordy Hughes, fire department, Missoula Rural Fire, see what their needs are, see what their concerns are with fire suppression in the city of Missoula and around the Missoula Valley, and, take those considerations forward, and then it'd be our job on council to, come with a solution that, will address their needs, for fire suppression, and, certainly the Rattlesnake Creek, dam project would be a calculus with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Lynn-Wood Fields.
This question feels to me like something that we're not dealing with yet. So I would say that that is definitely something to look at when the time comes. I don't want to jinx us, but this summer was the best summer we had in Montana over fires. We actually had less issues than we've had in the last 5 years. But I do believe in climate change, and I do believe this stuff is happening. However, that question to me feels like we're not there yet. It doesn't mean that we don't need to have a vision around that, but we're in the headwaters in Montana, thank goodness. We are at the place where there's the most water in the state, or in the nation. And so I imagine Eric's going to have some things to say about this. And so my sense of this is we're not there yet, but if that comes to it, I'll look at the research and make a decision on that.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. On to Ward 1, Gwen Nicholson.
I want to echo what Bob was saying in terms of making sure that we're taking input from rural and city fire departments, making sure that we're incorporating expert testimony into the decision-making process around this, and also making sure that we're doing a climate analysis of things like this. I think ultimately what it comes down to, though, is we have to be prepared for the realities of climate change, and fire suppression is a part of that. So making sure that we're working from the city level to with the neighborhood level, with city council working kind of hand in hand with neighborhood councils to put in plans for things like if there has to be an evacuation out of the Rattlesnake, making sure that there's an ample amount of information that's being supplied to people, making sure that people are aware of the plans that are in place when they are put into place, and making sure that, because there's only one exit out of the Rattlesnake, so fire suppression in that area is going to be a very, very critical part of city infrastructure and planning going forward, and I want to make sure that every neighborhood and every community is putting input on that.
Thank you, Ms. Nicholson. And Eric Melson.
Can you just repeat the question real quick?
Yes. So given that extreme heat and fire seasons will only get worse and water scarcer, do you support or oppose plans to breach the Rattlesnake Lake dams, emptying reservoirs likely to be needed for fire suppression and drinking water?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, and I do echo a lot of what my colleagues up here have said in terms of engagement with experts and with neighborhoods, but just a reminder for everyone, those dams that the question alludes to are within national forest boundaries, and they are within the Rattlesnake Wilderness area. And I would love to see those dams removed on a personal note, because I think we need to rewild the Rattlesnake Wilderness. Those dams were there for irrigation purposes. We're no longer using that water for irrigation purposes or for city drinking water. There's not a water security issue in the Rattlesnake, and I don't believe they could even use those lakes to suppress fire, to dip buckets out of there. So from an environmental standpoint, and I think from a climate resiliency standpoint, we should absolutely remove those dams and return the Rattlesnake to its wildest form possible, because it is a congressionally designated wilderness area.
Thank you, Mr. Melson. I'm going to move to a communication question here. Please talk about ways to keep your finger on the pulse to ensure you are actually representing the interests and concerns of citizens in your neighborhoods. And we'll begin with Ward 1 with Eric Melson.
Was that a question or a statement? The ways that I will engage with constituents in Ward 1 are how I have been engaging, which is going door to door, holding meet and greets, talking with as many people as possible about how life is going in Ward 1. Having an open door policy, being accessible, my cell phone number, my home address, and my email are all on my campaign website, and I welcome anybody to reach out anytime. I am a people person. I feel like my life is enhanced by the people I get to interact with. I want my life to be a mosaic of the people that I meet and interact with, and I think that I can learn something from literally everybody on this planet, and that is the mentality that I have, which is learning first, listening first, and then digesting that information and coming up with a good solution. So in terms of engagement with constituents, I have an open door policy. I would love to hear from as many people as I can, and I've been working really hard to hear from as many people as I can.
Thank you, Mr. Melson. Gwen Nicholson.
So the better part of my adult life has been spent in journalism and in communication, and specifically thinking about ways in which you can take issues and you can take these complicated things and make them transparent and understandable and clear to people who don't necessarily have the background to have an intuitive, deep understanding of things like this. And by things like this, I mean like city policy, the deeper ramifications of it, state policy too, and its impact on local communities. So I think, we can think of these ways in which we can kind of boil down information and bring it to people. I think the city could do a better job in terms of that kind of outreach and in terms of that kind of communication. And then also, being personally accessible, being personally accountable, I think is going to be a huge thing. And making sure that constituents know that, you can yell at me if you need to. That's more than acceptable. And in fact, that's the job of being a city councilor. So, yeah, that kind of thing.
Thank you, Ms. Nicholson. And for Ward 5, Lynn-Wood Fields.
Yeah, this is the thing I'm excited about doing. I have worked on legislation for the last 8 years and built a coalition of hundreds of filmmakers across the state. The best way to handle communication is to have a monthly meeting on Zoom, because people will ask you the same question over and over again on email and phone call. And if you can guide them to that, record that, and send that out, that's how you reach people in a mass way. So I am proposing to do that in my campaign no matter what. Every Tuesday, once a month, I will do it at lunch. All my constituents, other constituents, are more than welcome to join me to bring ideas, for me to explain why I voted or what is coming up. And I will be recording those, and maybe we'll just not do video recording. But as a filmmaker, making sure that people know and how to communicate with you, and then getting that message out, then they become the spokespersons for the community. This is what I heard, this is how I know. And the reason I know this is so important, because I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who sent an email, did not hear back, who made a call, did not hear back, do not know how to even get a hold of people, do not know how to get to certain things. That is something that definitely can be improved in the City Council.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. And Bob Campbell.
So, yeah, and I actually agree with Gwen. I think she made a great point about accessibility and accountability. I mean, those two are paramount if you're going to be on city council. And, I agree with things Mr. Melson said in terms of having your personal information on your webpage. I would keep my webpage going, so I have my email, I have my phone number or whatnot. And, I'd also look to, social media, Zoom, Microsoft Meetings or Microsoft Teams. I think that's what the city uses actually to, have a live session, regularly scheduled to, basically have an open door, as you will, electronically. But I think we have to be careful with that we still have old school you know, neighborhood meetings that get in the community. You know, we have meeting rooms for my ward, Stations 3 and Stations 5 of the fire department, where I can make myself available on a weekly basis. I think Councilman Carlino actually came up with the idea last term to have an open house or have a designated time every week where I literally have an open door and sitting down and anyone could just walk in and ask me a question old school for a time. I think it's just a more equitable solution in that regard.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question getting more specific to your own wards. What do you see as your ward's major challenges and assets? And we'll begin with Ward 5 with Lynn-Wood Fields.
It's always hard when you start right away. I haven't even had time to think. Okay. My ward has a few different things going on. We've got a lot of growth happening. We also have the Fort Missoula idea that people do not want high-level condos in there, and I agree with that. And so we have some challenges that way. Our assets, I am blown away by the amount that people in all of Missoula, but in our community, really want to see a solution. And I will tell you, I can't tell you how many people who are older are super concerned with younger people being able to move here. So one of the biggest assets that I see in my ward is the incredible amount of kindness and willingness to come up with solutions. And I would say the only other thing that is kind of happening in my ward too is we have a lot of people on fixed incomes and are really feeling this concern around property taxes and what are we going to do around that. And I think that that fear is real, and that's one of our jobs is figuring out how to alleviate some of that. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. Bob Campbell.
So yes, thank you. I too, I live off of 23rd, a little lower down the hillside, but I mean, views up there are great, of course, but I would say very spread out ward. We do have Fort Missoula there. I think, those are some of our assets. I too feel Fort Missoula, the townhome condominium project that they're proposing there is inappropriate. I think there's cultural significance, historical cultural significance. Fort Missoula used to be an internment camp in World War II. It was a military installation. I used to drill at Fort Missoula as a reservist for my time in the Army Reserve. And yeah, I think we need to keep that as is, but we have to be careful about letting that get to a point where it deteriorates to a point where, there's nothing left and now, development's going to happen there at any rate. So we have to have a plan in place to keep that fort intact as is. And I would just say too, with taxes, I hear it resoundingly, people on fixed incomes, older people want to downsize, new families that want to come in, those homes aren't there, and we need to correct that.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. For Ward 1, Eric Melson.
Yeah, Ward 1 is incredibly diverse and geographically dispersed as well. So the entire Rattlesnake Valley, in addition to the Northside neighborhood and the heart of Missoula, and also the Canyon River Golf Course in East Missoula. And each one of those communities has a lot of things to offer and also a lot of challenges. What I hear about mostly from the north side are struggles with infrastructure and it being an urban renewal district and a focal point of development. What I hear from the Rattlesnake is wildlife interactions and also wildfire preparedness. And what I hear from the Canyon River Golf Course is fixed income and property taxes. There's a lot of retirees over there. In terms of assets, I think the biggest asset of Ward 1 are the people. Getting to meet all the people that I've been able to meet over the past few months, there's so much passion, there's so much dedication to this community, and there's so much optimism, I think. People really want the best for Missoula. People have great ideas. I think that they need to feel like they're heard.
Thank you, Mr. Melson. And Gwen Nicholson.
So I think the challenges that face Ward 1 are a lot similar to the challenges that every ward faces in Missoula, especially around affordability. As Eric mentioned, the north side in particular is a target for development, and I hear concerns all the time that people are going to get priced out, that infill development is going to fundamentally change the character of neighborhoods. I also hear a lot about accessibility, not just in the north side, although the north side I think is one of the least accessible areas in all of Missoula, but also in the Rattlesnake too, you know. I think we need to extend infrastructure into the Rattlesnake in terms of expanding mountain line service. I think we need to make the north side in particular more accessible because there's a lot of people with mobility issues. There's a lot of families who would like to be able to send children to Lowell School and don't have that option because of the state of pedestrian infrastructure and bike infrastructure in the north side. And as Eric mentioned, the diversity, especially in terms of income level, I think is one of the biggest strengths of the ward. You know, I think we have a lot of different interests that allow for a lot of different possibilities.
Thank you, Ms. Nicholson. And this is the last question before we move on to closing statements. What is unique about you and your experience that will make your voice and opinion an important addition to the City Council? And beginning with Ward 1, Gwen Nicholson.
So again, I'm a renter. I have that kind of lived experience from growing up and spending my entire adult life as a renter in Missoula. I've been through that really heartbreaking struggle to find housing. I've had tons of friends move out explicitly because they couldn't find housing. I've had friends become homeless because of that. So that's very near and dear to my heart, and I think that's a viewpoint that needs to be represented on City Council. I also bring to the table my experiences as an Indigenous person, as a transgender person. You know, I think, and you know, as somebody who's a little bit younger, you know, bringing that kind of perspective as someone who's recently a student and you know has grown up in this community. I think you know. New blood is really important to the survival of institutions like this and staying responsive to the needs of the people. I really hope to represent that on City Council.
Thank you, Ms. Nicholson. Eric Melson.
Yeah, you know, I wouldn't say that I'm unique. Honestly, I think I'm pretty average. And I think that I represent a pretty average swath of Ward 1 in Missoula, honestly. I am just a normal white guy who loves living here, who loves his community, who has built a life here and is greatly appreciative of this place. And I think what I bring to the table is a passion for service and a skill set that I think can provide good leadership and good sound decision making on council. But in terms of my uniqueness, I am kind of just normal. I feel like I kind of fit in to the normal waves of Missoula and am just really grateful to be able to call this place home, to be able to really, very grateful to be able to have built a life here, honestly. And I just really want to give back to the place that's given me so much.
Thank you, Mr. Melson. And moving on to Ward 5, Bob Campbell.
Not very unique either. Sorry. But, so, you know, I was just really blessed to move here in '99, be able to raise a family, 4 children, and you know, they used the parks down Wapakia, which was awesome. My son learned to ride a bike down Wapakia. Schools, Chief Charlo, Middle Hill School, and then on to Sentinel High School. Go Spartans. Just that whole experience and a whole lived experience that, you know, as I will provide for them, I just, you know, feel that I want a situation where they could in turn, you know, with families of their own go through and, you know, have the same experience with their families going through. And I just see that slipping away. And that's a lot of what my drive was to, you know, try to get on City Council in the first place. And I look to my lived experience with land use planning, with law enforcement, and, you know, 23 years in law enforcement here in Missoula, 21 of those years on the street, straight patrol. And I've seen a lot of great things in this community. I've seen some of the worst things in this community, and you know we need to, you know, put together a program that works. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. And Lynn-Wood Fields.
I have heard that people are surprised that a filmmaker would run for political office, and today I was teaching a job service rapid training course, and the woman in the class who was learning about filmmaking was a campaign manager for major political people, and she said to me, whoa, filmmaking's just like politics. She said there's a mission, you have to have a bunch of people work together to succeed in that mission, and you have to come together to make projects. And I think that that is something that I'm really excited to bring to politics, is this idea of what's the story we want to create here? What is the vision that we want to create and collaborate together in Missoula for the future of Missoula? And I get to bring the skills of heart and storytelling and quite frankly, practical budgets and problem solving. You will never work on a film set where something doesn't go wrong. And in my experience, that's kind of similar to running a city council too. And so I think that I'm really excited to be somebody who's in the creative realm, working in the political realm.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. All right, and we are going to move on to 2-minute closing statements from the candidates, and we'll reverse the order from the opening statements. So beginning with Ward 1 and Eric Melson. You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to everyone for coming out, and thanks to the League of Women Voters for hosting, and also the neighborhood councils. This is an awesome opportunity to answer some really tough questions. And in my closing statement, I think what I hope you guys take from me is a good sense of kind of who I am as a person and some of my experience that has led me here and my interest in running. I think that Missoula is amazing. I feel so fortunate to live here, to have built a life here. I was a renter here for 12 years. I have had to cobble together a life here. I've had to work multiple jobs at the same time to afford a life here. I'm still having to hustle and grind it out to make a life here. But this place means the world to me. And I think it would be the greatest of honors to work with you and our community to make this place even better. I think that we're really lucky to have this place. I do think that the city is in a place with a lot of challenges that we're looking down. And I think that I bring some of the skills and the temperament to solve some of those problems. So yeah, I think that's about it for me.
Thank you, Eric Melson. And Gwen Nicholson.
Thank you, first of all, to the League of Women Voters, and thank you to the neighborhood councils, and thank you to everybody in attendance. Something I learned about Missoula not too long ago when I was working in Helena during the session was how grateful I am to have a place like this, especially because when I was working there, I, to be frank, experienced a lot of racist abuse. I experienced a lot of abuse on the basis of my gender and sexuality. And it made me really appreciate the fact that Missoula has been a place where I've been able to fully be myself. It's a place where I found an incredible amount of community, both as somebody who's invested in making this community better, as somebody who is a member of queer communities and indigenous communities. Missoula is a really, really special place, and it's a place where people can flourish and be the best version of themselves. And that's the main thing that I want to, impart onto people, is that we have a lot of crises that we're facing, we have a lot of challenges that we're facing, and we have a lot of major things on the horizon that stand to change the face of Missoula as we know it. And I think we have enough motivated people here. I think we have enough tools to work with here that we can continue to make sure that Missoula is a really special place and a place where good things can happen. And yeah, I look forward to working with everybody, both on this dais and in this room, to make that happen.
Thank you, Ms. Nicholson. And for Ward 5 closing statements, we'll begin with Lynn-Wood Fields.
I too want to thank everybody, thanks to the League of Women Voters for having us and the city councils, and for everybody up here, and for you moderating. Appreciate that. I spent a lot of years sitting around the table talking about politics and, quite frankly, maybe complaining about some things. And it got to the place where I felt like if I'm not in the arena, I shouldn't keep talking. And so it felt like it was time to at least try, to give it a try, to run, to see if I could find out what this whole political world was about. I've learned a ton about what it takes to run a campaign. And I've learned a ton about how much Missoula is already doing. And I think sometimes we don't talk about that enough. I mean, this community is trying so hard to solve problems. We need to make sure that's out there. Are there more things we can be doing? Yes, there's a lot more. And I'm excited about the opportunity to be a part of the solution. Not the person who's just sitting there talking about what's wrong, but what can we do to make it better? And I feel really personally motivated because I have two young boys who are looking at me, who are actively part of my campaign. My 8-year-old surprised me by knocking on everyone's door in our neighborhood and putting up signs in the middle at 8 p.m. at night. So I had to go out and thank them because I looked like I didn't know where my kid was. But and his friends have helped. It's been a giant community effort. I have had filmmakers, I've had parents, I've had kids. This has been an incredible experience, and I think people don't talk enough about how actually fun it is to run for office. You only hear the bad things, but I'm sure you've had this experience too. People are so great. People say, thank you for running. We need people to run, and we appreciate you. So the last thing I'll say is that I really listen to my constituents, and I think right now what we need is somebody who listens and then stands up for them. And I really want to be able to use my voice, my skills, my research, my collaboration with other people on the city council to make Missoula the best it can be moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. And last but not least, Bob Campbell.
Thank you so much. Thank you, League of Women Voters. Thank you, Missoula Neighborhoods. And thank my compadres up here too. One of the things we see oftentimes is, a lot of people complain again, social media, they complain. And one of our great First Amendment rights is the ability to petition our government and come in, speak, and speak to a local governing body about, your wishes, your desires, your concerns. And there's no greater expression of that, I think, than running for public office. So to the three of you, I say thank you. And everyone else out there, Alan, thank you. I've been knocking a lot of doors, and great people in Ward 5, just awesome folks to talk to. Never a crass look or a stink eye or anything like that. They tell me their concerns. Sometimes we have disagreements, but, by and large, they're really concerned about, where Missoula's heading to over, the next few years. And they look back to, what we've seen with growth, with lack of available housing, with the housing costs going up, and recent tax increases. We've sustained over 20% over the last 2 years, and it's just not sustainable going forward. And I think we have to be cognizant of that. We need to be cognizant of the fact that it's the people's money that we're spending on council, and be more mindful of that going forward. We're going to have some tough conversations ahead. Fiscal year 25, no matter who's sitting up here, is going to be a tough one. We're losing ARPA money. We're looking at anywhere between a 2 or 4 million shortfall from where we were last year, and we're going to have some tough discussions. We're going to have to decide what services we all agree upon we need as a community, and have some tough discussions and conversations about the rest. And that's going to be hard work. It's going to be a grind, but I think I bring my experience to bear, from the law enforcement sector, from being part of the city of Missoula structure for the last 23 years in my time as a land use planner, worked with the development community and try to solve these problems that are facing us going forward. So thank you all very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. And that is a wrap for our forum. I just have a few quick closing remarks. Thank you so much, candidates, all 4 of you, for your very thoughtful responses, and most of all, really for your willingness to serve the Missoula public on City Council. Thank you so much. A great way to make your voice heard and shape the future of your community is to join your local neighborhood council. Visit Missoula Neighborhoods webpage at missoula-neighborhoods.org, or contact Kalina Pritchard with the Neighborhoods office for information. She is in the house tonight if you're in person. And to learn more about the League of Women Voters of Missoula, it is a member organization. We have some more information out front, or you can find them online. November 7th is Election Day. This will be an all mail-in election. Ballots will be mailed to voters 20 days prior to the election. Ballots may be returned in the mail or in person to the Missoula County Elections Office. Ballots must be received at the Missoula County Elections Office or a valid drop box by Election Day, November 7th, 2023 at 8 p.m. You must be registered to vote and be listed as an active voter on the registration rolls to receive a ballot. Check your registration information at the My Voter page on the Montana Secretary of State's election website. If you're not registered to vote, it is not too late. Contact the Missoula County Elections Office to learn more, or any of the volunteers from the League of Women Voters can help you out here this evening as well. On behalf of the Missoula League of Women Voters, thank you so much for joining us this evening, And remember, your vote counts.